So let's say you wanted to build the perfect society right from scratch. Where would you even begin? With the laws? The buildings? Well, for the 17th century philosopher Thomas Hobbes, the answer was way more fundamental. He said if you want to build a stable state, you first have to understand its smallest, most basic part, the human mind. So let's dive into Hobbes's incredible blueprint for how to build a human, and from there, a whole society.
Hobbes kicks things off with this really powerful metaphor. He says the state, the whole commonwealth, is basically a giant artificial man. It's a machine that we, humans, build to protect ourselves. He calls it the Leviathan. The whole idea is that it's bigger, stronger, and way more powerful than any one of us, and its entire job is to keep us safe. But how does a machine like that actually work? And Hobbes, man, he breaks this down in this fascinatingly mechanical way. The supreme power, what he calls the sovereignty. Well, that's the soul that gives the whole thing life. The judges and officials are the joints that let it move and act. And get this, reward and punishment, those are the nerves, sending signals through the body to make every part do its job. In his view, a happy society is literally a healthy body. And a civil war, well, that's just death.
Okay, so to understand this huge artificial man, we have to understand the natural man who builds it. And for Hobbes, that means we have to start at the very, very beginning, the origin of a single thought. I mean, how does the outside world even get into our heads in the first place?
This right here is the bedrock of Hobbes's whole philosophy. He's saying that nothing, not a single idea, not a dream, not a complex theory, can exist in your mind unless it first came in through your senses. Every single thought you've ever had can be traced back to something you saw, heard, touched, tasted, or smelled. Period.
Hobbes didn't see this as some kind of magic. For him, it was pure physics. Think of it like a chain reaction. An object out there in the world puts pressure on, say, your eye. That pressure creates a motion that travels down your nerves. Then, your brain and heart push back against that incoming motion. It's that resistance, that counterpressure, that your mind actually experiences as sight or sound. So perception isn't passive. It's an active physical collision happening inside you.
And you gotta understand, this was a huge deal back then. He was picking a fight with the establishment. The old philosophy, from Aristotle, was that objects send out these little invisible copies of themselves, species, that fly into our eyes. Hobbes said, no way, that's nonsense. The object just creates motion in us. The color red isn't in the apple. The experience we call red is a motion happening inside our heads.
So, if a sensation is that initial impact, that first motion, what happens after the object is gone? What is all that stuff inside our heads actually made of? Well, this brings us to imagination and memory.
For Hobbes, imagination isn't some mystical, creative power. It's much simpler. It's literally decaying sense. I love this analogy he uses. Think about waves in the water. Even after the wind stops blowing, the waves keep moving for a while, right? Just getting weaker and weaker. He says that's exactly what an imagination is. It's the physical motion from a sensation, still rattling around in our brain, just fading over time.
So, what's the real difference between imagination and memory? According to Hobbes, basically nothing. They are the exact same thing. We tend to use the word imagination when we're talking about the image itself, the fancy, and we use the word memory when we want to point out that the image is old, it's faded, and it refers to something that happened in the past. At the end of the day, it's just two different names for the same decaying motion.
All right, so we've got all these fading echoes of sensations bouncing around in our heads. How do they connect to each other? How do we get from just one single image to what we actually call thinking? This is what Hobbes called the train of thought.
He says our thoughts can flow in one of two ways. The first is unguided, which is basically your mind just wandering from one thing to the next, seemingly at random, like when you're daydreaming. The second is regulated, and that's when a powerful desire or a goal acts like a director, pulling all your thoughts toward a specific purpose.
But here's the cool part. Hobbes shows that even those so-called unguided thoughts aren't truly random. He gives this amazing example. Someone's in a conversation about the Civil War, and suddenly they ask a question about a Roman penny. Seems to come out of nowhere, right? But Hobbes traces the chain. The war made him think of the king's betrayal, which connected to Christ's betrayal, which connected to the price of that betrayal, which led to the question about the coin. Every thought is linked to the one before it.
Regulated thought, on the other hand, is all about focus. You can think of it like this. If you keep your ultimate goal constantly in your mind, it acts like a kind of gravitational force on your thinking. Every time your thoughts start to drift off, the power of that desire just pulls them right back on track.
So far, pretty much everything we've talked about, sensation, memory, even these trains of thought, is something Hobbes believed we share with animals. So what is the one single invention that lifts humanity above every other creature on Earth? For Hobbes, the answer is simple: speech.
And Hobbes saw language as this incredibly powerful but also very dangerous double-edged sword. On one side, you've got its proper uses. We can use words to record our thoughts and build science. We can teach other people. We can work together. And we can even create art and delight each other. But for every single one of those uses, there's a dark side. We can get our thoughts wrong and deceive ourselves, use tricky metaphors to deceive others, just straight up lie, or use our words simply to hurt people.
This leads Hobbes to a really mind-bending conclusion. He says truth and falsity don't actually exist out there in the world of things. They are properties of speech. You know, a rock isn't true or false, it just is. But if I say this rock is a bird, well, that statement is false. And this means that if we want to find the truth, the single most important thing we can do is be super precise with our definitions. Without clear meanings for our words, all of our thinking just collapses into nonsense.
So let's bring this all the way back to the beginning. We've taken apart the human mind, from a single sensation all the way to the power of language. So how does any of this help us build and govern that big artificial man, the state?
Hobbes' final instruction is that ancient advice, know thyself. But he means this in a very practical, almost political way. He's arguing that the ultimate textbook for understanding society, power, and government is basically the instruction manual of your own mind. And what you're supposed to be looking for isn't the specific things people want, like one person wants money, another wants fame. That stuff is all over the place. No, instead, you have to observe the universal mechanics of the passions themselves, the nature of what desire feels like, what fear feels like, what hope feels like. By understanding how these forces work inside of you, you can understand how they work inside of everybody.
And so we end with Hobbes' challenge, not just to kings and rulers, but really to all of us. To understand humanity, he says, you have to first read the text of yourself. He's laid out his version of that text, a world of motion, decaying sense, and trains of thought. And the final question he leaves us with is a big one. When you look inside, do you find the same?